Greetings, welcome to the Pandemic Podcast with me, Dan Astin-Gregory. Tonight, in this solo episode, I asked the question, how free is free? In case anyone was still wondering just how thoroughly we've been played and betrayed, Prime Minister Boris Johnson went out of his way to hammer it home yesterday. Just hours into Freedom Day, he aggressively announced that from September, being double vaccinated would become mandatory to gain access to nightclubs and other venues that attract crowds. No more proof of negative tests or natural immunity. No, just the jab. Downing Street has since gone even further by declining to rule out that pubs and other small businesses will be exempt from this ruling and could be even extended as far as small, badly ventilated rooms, which is so broad it could encompass anything. And while all this was going on, backdrop of an absurd self-isolation, pingdemic, sidelining thousands, in fact millions within the last week, and the inconsistent devolution of freedom rules to businesses and public bodies, the government very quietly unveiled the latest step in its digital identity roadmap. It is time to take stock as we answer this question, how free is free? And I'll attempt to unravel all of this and explore what we can do to upend this increasingly dystopian new normal. Now, I have to concede, it's a hot day. I'm feeling hot and bothered, but I'm feeling more hot and bothered by what was revealed last night. But before we get into the primary piece around the latest announcement pertaining to the vaccinations and the increasingly coercive mandatory prospects that follow, let's talk about Freedom Day in England, a day that should have been rich in celebration, coming to the end of a long series of restrictions. But of course, in the build up to that very day, the case-demic, the sensationalism and fear-mongering reached fever pitch in the days approaching Freedom Day, to the point where essentially on the very day that should have been a vast celebration, really a dull moment, with millions still operating as though the rules had not changed. Sadly, under these conditions, many people, in fact, rather than just embracing the Freedom Day for what it is, in fact, have been calling for restrictions to be continued or even increased in the face of rising cases in England. So Freedom Day, how free is free? Well, let's explore. So the end of all restrictions, well, that may be so in some ways, but really, what does that mean in practical terms? So whilst you may now presently be able to attend a nightclub and make the most of it, because if you haven't had your jabs, then you can only go until September, and until then, until someone builds a parallel society, you'll be waiting outdoors and kicked from the curb like you were maybe when you were 15 or 16 years old and your fake ID didn't work. You've now got a same situation, but your name's not down, you're not coming in, your jab isn't in, you're not coming in, is the new rule on the guest list. So how did Freedom Day unfold? Well, many people still wearing masks, many people still wearing masks around the shops, supermarkets, etc., despite them no longer being mandatory. And in fact, many businesses still requiring customers to wear them. In fact, shop unions have been pushing for continued mask wearing. The union previously urged the government not to lift COVID safety measures in shops. That's the retail union. And retail staff working in the public every day are deeply worried about catching COVID-19, according to the General Secretary. Well, this is another example of how we've really just not paid attention to any of the evidence. I mean, cast your mind way back now. It's so long ago. It feels like one continuous period, but cast your mind back to March, April 2020, when the supermarket workers, if you will, remember, did not have any form of PPE. They didn't wear masks. And actually, they had one of the lowest levels of infection rates, lowest fatality rates. These stores went through the entire breadth of the pandemic really unscathed. So it's crazy that we're talking in these terms. It's more about the fear of what could happen rather than what actually happens. And this is the same with general mask wearing. Now, there's lots of debate still around mask wearing. You know, you get into a debate on social media, you'll send one paper invalidating the use of masks and someone else will send you another paper. But what's seemingly evident is that the weight of evidence suggests that the effectiveness of masks in reducing or eliminating infections is as thin as the mask itself compared to the empirical evidence and the past studies that have been done on aerosols and transmission via masks and the like. But nonetheless, the debate is still open. Still open. But in the build-up to the lockdown, hot day today, I can barely talk. In the build-up to the lockdown summit, we spoke to a senior member of SAGE who informed us that the thinking around masks was primarily based upon one school of thought around transmission. And there's two distinct schools of thought. And of course, the SAGE approached one that required these mandates, as opposed to ignore the other school of thought altogether, and has subsequently still ignored trends in the data. So really, as I previously mentioned on the show, we spoke to a nurse at one of the ICU units nearby. She described them as placebos for people's anxieties, and people have deep anxieties about COVID-19 because of the relentless fear-mongering, and even thus far into the pandemic, people still have no clear idea of the actual risks. Perception of risk is so significant that despite Freedom Day unlocking all of these restrictions, people are still afraid and worried about catching COVID-19. So you've got the unions and the shops calling for masks to still be used. You've got independent businesses independently choosing to enforce mask wearing. You've got the public transport. You've got the airlines. So really, how free is free on the day that restrictions are meant to be lifted? Well, the powers are now devolved. It's no longer a legal requirement or mandatory requirement from the government level, but they've now empowered the local businesses and authorities to make their own rules. So now we have all these disparate situations with different businesses doing different things, different local authorities calling for different. Here in Bristol, of course, being a part of the kind of overall left-wing approach to lockdowns and such, we've seen this left-leaning pro-lockdown, pro-mask situation. Bristol, being a left city, is calling for these masks to continue across all business. So again, real pressure. So how free is free? How many restrictions have really lifted? Well, the mandates have lifted, but the restrictions are still here. Not only have we got the mask situation, we've got the emerging pingdemic. You know, the fuss that we saw at the weekend about Boris Johnson and the fact that he was supposedly part of a pilot program. Now, between you and I've been part of a pilot program myself since the beginning of this thing, self-nominated pilot program, and the results have been spectacular so far. But I have not participated in this pingdemic. But Boris was on a pilot program, supposedly, which caused outrage, rightly so. One rule for them, one rule for the others. But the real problem is not the fact that there was one rule for them and one for the others. It's more the problem of track and trace itself. Take Boris Johnson as an example. He's someone who has allegedly had the virus, and I say allegedly because there were 2 staff members that resigned because they wouldn't sign off on the fact that he actually had the virus, but that's a story for another day. But if he did indeed have the virus and has had both of his jabs, then isn't it completely ludicrous? Isn't it completely crazy that anyone, Boris or otherwise, who's supposedly had the infection and had the jabs has to isolate? You know, the chances of them getting infected or being infected is significantly low. So we've got this crazy pingdemic. I agree the fact that, you know, it should never be one rule for them, one for us. That is a big issue, but that should not detract from the real issue that track and trace is broken. So despite restrictions being lifted, we still live in this pingdemic. And in the previous week, 1.8 million people were pinged across the UK, which causes all of these people to be isolated, some of which are tested positive. Over 500,000 people were sent contact tracing alerts, which means that we've got all of these businesses, we've got hospitals, we've got retail outlets, all kinds of businesses struggling to continue, despite the fact that, you know, a simple ping does not mean that someone has necessarily come into contact with someone who's actually sick or infectious. But due to this process, we're living in this society now with rising cases where, the theatres have closed, National Trust houses have closed, Marks and Spencer's had to close some of their stores, some of the rail services were disrupted. Many of the services that the public are trying to access on Freedom Day were partially available or not available at all due to this pingdemic. So we live supposedly in this now free society, yet so many people are getting pinged that you can't really get away from the fact that this is a fiction in itself, restriction to your liberties. But really, we must start to ask, when will this track and trace end? What purpose does it serve? As we heard from the lockdown summit, several of the speakers talked about a much more light touch surveillance system to actually understand the prevalence of the virus and not at society level. So we have the mask situation, we have the pingdemic, but above all, we've got this real issue now that has emerged from last night regarding coercive mandatory vaccinations through the back door, really. So Downing Street has suggested that full vaccination will now be mandatory for nightclub entry this autumn, regardless of your current infection status by test. This is a policy that's been set out that they're looking to introduce by the end of September. It's still got to go through the House of Parliament, but as we've seen, almost every single one of these draconian situations, these legislations, mandates, however you want to describe them, have passed their way through with minimal opposition. Exemptions will be considered for those who can't get vaccines for medical reasons, but the hope is very slim here. We are moving towards a society where your access to society itself will be determined by your vaccine status, having completely U-turned, as always, with the UK government. There's a very clear formula, if you haven't yet picked up on it, which is to deny, first and foremost. Remember the vaccine minister saying it's not going to happen in the UK back in January. We won't have this. Then it's deliberate. We're going to put out this consultation to the public, and then it's deploy. It's very clear, the formula: deny, deliberate, deploy. So anytime you hear the government say this isn't going to happen, you can bet your bottom or dollar that it will happen. So will this be rolled out more broadly than large event spaces? But put it this way: if you've not had your jabs and you want to go to a nightclub or a gig or a sporting event or any theatre or any other production or any business event or any gathering of any magnitude, any size, it's highly likely that you will not be able to gain access unless you've been double vaccinated. So even those who have had a single shot will be unable to gain access. So this is deeply discriminatory. It's one of the most illiberal things I've seen happen in my entire adult life. And there's been uproar amongst the very small population of the world, sadly. And it goes to see that to show that the propaganda is working. And I'm going to break that down in a moment. But Lord Sumption, of course, commented saying that these are completely unnecessary and should not be imposed by the state. It's recognizing that getting vaccinated is a choice that people have, and they should not be compelling people through these coercive practices in order to force the situation. We've got this situation right now where people are feeling threatened that their access to society is going to be removed unless they get jabbed. Now, we've seen this tactic happen across Europe. We saw it in France. This heavy-handed approach saw a record amount of jabs in a single day in France with the threat of mandatory vaccination. So is this a heavy-handed threat, or is this a long-term prospect for further erosion of our rights or liberties? Time will tell. But I'm trying to remain calm about this during this broadcast. But to be quite frank, I'm very worried about the direction that society is going, and it's even more concerning on the basis of the public reaction. If I'm honest, whilst the types of people who watch this show are very open-minded, very critical of draconian rules such as this, and we're probably on the same page. It's highly likely, at least, if you've been watching the show for any amount of time. But we have to recognize that outside of the small group of people that we have that see clearly around these issues, the reality is 46 million people in Britain have had at least one shot of the vaccination, which is over 90% of the adult population. There's actually between 6 and 8 million people over the age of 18 who haven't had a jab yet, which is a very small number, a small percentage of the population who've not had a jab. So you can imagine that the reaction amongst those who have been jabbed, they are being supportive of these ideas. I mean, I just blew my mind at the comments that I was witnessing on Twitter last night, and I'm going to share some of these. I won't give the names, but it just crushes my soul when I hear these responses. It's just ludicrous. One individual said, "I have the right not to be infected by some anti-vaxxer. My 2 jabs doesn't fully protect me on its own," essentially arguing for these ludicrous policy in order to protect her because she recognizes her own jabs aren't good enough. Now, forgive me for this, but we are infallible. Human beings are infallible. We do get sick. Now, we may have got less sick during the pandemic because we haven't been circulating, we haven't been moving about one another. So, you know, there is a side effect of that, less colds and such. But the reality is the price you pay for missing out on a cold is liberty, is life itself. This idea that you can prevent sickness or illness is futile. Now, the chances are some of these individuals are not that healthy themselves, and they want to take the shortcut to living a healthy life or avoiding disease. But this is the type of mindset that we're facing. Another person said, why is this illiberal? Enforce COVID passports and encourage people to engage with society by getting the vaccine. If they choose not to, you don't get to go out. It's simple. You've exercised your choice. So here you have someone saying, if you don't get vaccinated, you shouldn't have access to society. Another one said it's brought to protect others, which would be the purpose of the vaccine passports. I'm very happy to pass over my yellow fever certificate when I travel. What's the alternative? We've completely lost our minds. We've completely lost our ability to rationalize what's going on. So this really does paint a bleak picture, because it's easy to get caught up in the fact that you go to a protest and there might be 1 million or 2 million people there. The reality is you've got 40+ million on the other side of the debate who have been totally freaked out by all of the communication around COVID-19. The propaganda has worked. They believe that they are going to die. My own mother, by the way, love my mother to bits. She honestly believes that she has a 100% chance of the virus. It's crazy. 100% chance. My own family member. Of course, you know, she is older than I am, and she gives her a slightly elevated risk, but 100% chance of mortality. People are in this mindset that they will die if they get the virus. We need to start telling people that yes, there is a virus here and that it does affect people in some ways, but the majority of people get no symptoms at all or very mild symptoms. It's crazy. And the reality is we've seen, which is the unspoken, you know, the fraudulent use of the term safe, effective and rare that we've seen in the last 12 months. We have already seen now in the UK that the number of actual cases in the UK amongst the vaccinated has now exceeded the number of cases amongst the unvaccinated. Now, before you get all maths on me, I know the critical argument to that is, well, of course there's more amongst the vaccinated, because statistically, if you've got 46 million of them people have been vaccinated, and you know the other 20 million who haven't, then there's a higher probability that that number of people, particularly if you're only tracking over 18s, would be vaccinated. But nonetheless, people's expectation is that it would block cases. The primary endpoint for these vaccines is not to stop the disease, it's to reduce the severity of it. And it's questionable whether it's even doing that. But nonetheless, you know, to create these draconian rules on the idea that you're going to reduce transmission is crazy, because we're seeing, you know, look at the countries that have the highest number of cases. By coincidence, of course, it's always a coincidence, happen to be the countries that have the highest number of injection rollouts per capita. You've just got to start tapping on your mind and going, why is that? Just tap on your brain a little bit and wake it up and say, why are the countries that have given out the highest number of doses got the highest number of cases? Why is that happening? We need to start having common sense. But the fear-mongering is driving people, and it's driving a wedge between people where the vaccinated are seeing the unvaccinated as the cause of the problem. Now, this morning, whilst I was out doing a little bit of gardening before it got too hot, just you got to do something to get your mind off it. I was listening, I say that, I was listening to an audio book called On Tyranny by Professor Timothy Snyder. And he talked about what happened in the precursor to World War II, where they started in Germany labeling the businesses Jewish and Aryan. And at the beginning, there was a reaction. There was a somewhat of a reaction to that we shouldn't be doing this. But it became normalized and accepted very quickly. So you divided society almost like that, where one store for those type of people, one store for these type of people. And we know how that ended up. But that is where we are going. Vaccinated over here, unvaccinated over there. And remember, the poor Jews were labeled as dirty, unclean, infected, disease-orientated. All of it, of course, false. But now we're still seeing the same thing here. And people are like, oh, no, it's different. It's different. It's different. It's different. No, it isn't different. Discriminating and segregating society is not different when you're doing it on any characteristic, any human characteristic, whether it's race or medical status, is dividing based upon your human characteristics. It's happening. And those reactions that I shared that I've just read out from across Twitter are testament to the fact here that we are seeing a divide between the vaccinated and the unvaccinated. And people are saying, well, you know, this divide is a good thing because it'll encourage more of this. Is another quote. It will encourage more people to join the vaccinated crew, which it will. We've seen it in France. But you're eroding people's choice in the face of the fact that, number one, it isn't reducing cases. Number two, we've only really measured the primary endpoints of reduction in hospitality and death during spring and summer months. What's going to happen in autumn and winter when cases properly go up during a time where people's immune systems are more compromised? Well, I can tell you it's predictable. We're likely to see more hospitalizations and deaths. Professor Doommonger Ferguson, who's been rolled out as always just before Freedom Day to really ramp up the pain, predicting 1,000, 2,000 people hospitalized per day. Most of them will be vaccinated. Well, of course it will, because the majority of the population has been vaccinated. But you're telling us that it's going to reduce the burden of disease. Yet you're going to divide society based upon on a product that is not reducing cases, and it's unclear yet, but it's unlikely to significantly reduce hospitalizations and deaths in the way that it's been prescribed. It'd be more like a flu vaccine, where it's between 10 and 40, 50% at best, most likely. But we're dividing society on this basis. So what's going to happen is this. What's going to happen is this. Is in autumn, September, mark my words, we will see the rollout of the first wave of booster shots. It's going to happen, because as soon as this cases properly go up and we start to see that follow with hospitalizations and one of my team just said, calm down. Sorry, I will calm down. Thank you. Thank you very much, Lydia. I will. I'm on a rant. It's a down rant. I knew this would happen. I'm hot and bothered. But it's not just hot and bothered. The reality is we're at the precipice of a divided society, and the prospects of that are significant and lasting. And it's really important we look at this. You're right. If I get ranty and shouty, the people who need to hear this may not listen. We're in an experimental phase, right? We're in this experimental phase. We don't know the results yet we're willing to divide society based upon that premise, and overinflate people's expectations. So mark my words, come August, come September, we will see the first wave of booster shots. And I say first wave because there will be another one. It's what will happen right now, falsely, is that the Delta variant will be blamed. Yet if you just take a moment again, just to tap on your noggin and go and have a look at the patterns that are emerging around the world, and then, for example, go to Our World in Data and look at the patterns of the variants, which variants are most dominant in which countries, you'll recognize that the same patterns are happening regardless of what variant is prevailing. So we have to, again, just stop and think, well, you're blaming the variants, but actually look at the countries that don't have the same outbreaks with Delta. Then maybe we'll have Alpha or one of the other ones, and we're still seeing the same patterns. So to blame the variants, whilst it may play a role, a common sense corner, it might do. I think we have seen evidence that the Delta is more transmissible this time around, despite the boy crying wolf all these times before. We just don't know what the impact's going to be, and it's likely that we're going to see a divided society, vaccine passports. But what's even more concerning is the probability of mandatory vaccinations in care settings and the NHS and other healthcare settings. It won't be long before, the society decides that vaccinations and medical interventions are for the greater good. As party, it's your duty to protect one another, and your right to choose will be gone. I truly believe that is the path that we're sadly on. Now, remember, I've talked first about the efficacy. We've got to get to the point where we confront the fact that these are highly unlikely to be as effective as described. These have been marketed falsely. Remember, these big pharmaceutical companies have been fined billions for false marketing in the past. And once again, we're being falsely marketed upon around a relative risk reduction that won't materialize in actual risk reduction in the way that people have been led to believe. Yet we're just frantically shoving it into people's arms, taking away people's choices. And at what point do we go back and say, well, actually, they're not working as we expected? The newspapers are slightly fritting on the edge of it. They are saying, oh, look at this place. All 100 people were double vaccinated, yet we still saw the cases. They're touching on the sidelines, but they're not going to go to the question which says, are they actually working? Which is the question we need to be doing. And the second piece is then around the safety record, because, of course, in Great Britain now, we've now exceeded over 1 million adverse reactions. And, of course, we're on a sliding scale now from the elderly to the young. And the young are the ones that are being targeted with the latest propaganda, because they're the ones that they're being threatened that you can't go to the nightclubs. Firstly, we won't let you travel. Now we won't let you go to the pub. Now we won't let you go to the nightclubs unless you get vaccinated. So, of course, what happens? They all rush to get vaccinated because their desire to get their life back exceeds their perception of the potential hazard of an untested, insufficiently tested experimental product. And we just ignore these major problems: blood clots, myocarditis, blindness, all kinds of crazy conditions that have emerged. Now, personally, I'm 37 years old. I feel very healthy. My fear of the vaccine is far higher than the fear of the virus. And I had a history of autoimmune conditions, which technically puts me in a higher risk for something like COVID-19. But I'm far more worried about the potential, no matter how rare, of having a very serious, incurable, life-changing adverse reaction. The reality is, if I got COVID, I may have already had it. I haven't checked. But if I can get access to a proper test that would enable me to test my own immune response, I'd be very interested to find out. But nonetheless, I'd be very confident that my body would deal with this. And even if it doesn't, even if I get a severe, if I'm one of the people that gets a moderate or severe case, the chances of me recovering are still very, 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 very high. But myocarditis, blood clots that could potentially be life-threatening, not for me. Thank you very much. So in situation, our access to society is potentially going to be limited. Now, I don't go to the nightclubs that much anymore, but having been through the lockdowns, do you know what? I'm craving a solid night out. I'm with my wife, and I, obviously she's not drinking, but I've gone the journey with her. I haven't had any alcohol since the 1st of January. But I could still go and hit the dance floor. Believe me, I really would like to have a session. So I'll get my party in before September, because I am not allowing this to force a situation. I will withdraw from society if I need to, and ride out the cause and work alongside the other 5 to 6 or 7 million of us who have decided not to participate in this experiment, that we are part of the control group. Then together we can create our parallel society where we don't discriminate, we don't segregate, and we welcome everyone open for all with open arms. And now, nightclubs are one thing, workplaces are another. Now we're seeing already, again, similarly, some employers taking a hard line. In fact, Bloomsbury, the publisher, saying that vaccines will be compulsory. A major employer will be compulsory for UK staff returning from its offices, as Morgan Stanley Bank and other major institutions are insisting that their staff must be vaccinated. I don't know how they're getting away with that on a legal basis. I'll be very curious to speak to an employment lawyer in the coming weeks on the Pandemic podcast to address that point. But to me, we're on a very dark and slippery slope where people's choices are being taken away one by one, and this idea that it's for the greater good. And I just can't help but see that scene from the film with Simon Pegg, where they're in the what's it called? You'll have to remind me in the comments. But they're in the field one night. The whole town have basically been killing townspeople. And they are there in the dark, and Simon Pegg saying what we're doing. And they're all just mindlessly saying, it's for the greater good. It's for the greater good. We're in this crazy spot where the idea of the greater good has overtaken any rational logic about what we should really do. So we've got this situation now. Not only is it pubs and clubs, but workforces, and across Europe, we've seen it. I mean, right now, Saudi Arabia has already taken, in the Middle East, has already taken the view that have no job. We're seeing mandatory requirements in Italy, France, Greece, Russia, Ireland haven't ruled things out. We're on a slippery slope. With the hard-fought rights of bodily autonomy is eroding in front of us, and people's access to society is eroding in front of us. This is a very deeply concerning time, hence my little rant, hence my rage. It's not just the heat. And the reality is, as someone who prides himself on ability to solve problems, at this point, I don't have the answers. I don't even have an idea what the answers could be. But certainly, the first thing we need to think about is non-compliance. Non-compliance. Immediately, the opportunity, if you work for an employer or shop in an outlet that participates in this authoritarian segregation scheme, you've got to stop shopping there and stop working there. You know, it's all very well going to a protest and being non-compliant for the period of time that you're at the protest. But we've all got to go home and say, I'm not shopping in these locations. I'm not dining here. I am not working there. Because the reality is the opposing side is clamping down here. In March, there was a poll of 2,000 workers done by Glassdoor, the employee review website. It found that more than half surveyed said that it should be a requirement for staff to have a COVID vaccination before going to the office. This dissonance has deeply gripped people. Another poll said that 1 in 7 would hand in their notice if they were required to go back to work before all the other employees had been vaccinated. 1 in 7 said they won't go back to work and they'll resign unless all of their colleagues are vaccinated. This is how crazy we've got. We're not even thinking about the risks of the virus, the probability of getting sick. Think about it. You know, whilst it is different from influenza, the risks are comparable in many ways. The prognosis is comparable in many ways. Yes, there is evidence of severe disease in some cases, but how have we lost our ability to perceive risk for what it is and actually tolerate sickness? We're at a place now where our rights and liberties are under threat. So how free is free on Freedom Day? Well, it's even less free than it was the day before Freedom Day. That is clear. With Hot Fuzz, thank you for who just said the comment. Hot Fuzz is the film I was thinking of for the greater good. So we've got this situation where Freedom Day has come and gone. People are still wearing masks. People are being asked to wear masks. People are getting pinged, staying home from work to isolate, even if they've had the virus or been vaccinated. And we've got the prospect of mandatory vaccination in the United Kingdom, not just for healthcare workers, but for all. And if it's not done through policy, it's done by coercion. So the reality is here, we're facing not only a flawed solution that the government has elected, along with many other governments that we've got around vaccinations that are probably neither as effective nor safe as described. And life is going to be segregated on that basis. So, as I say, I don't have a message of hope for right now. The only answer that I do have is this: do not comply. Do not comply. Do not comply. And rather than the mass protests, which are all very useful, they're all very fun, we need to be educating people on a one-to-one basis. We need to get back into our communities, looking people eye to eye and saying, are you willing to let this happen? You know, if you've been vaccinated and you don't feel safe, then you need to be challenging your government to say why. If you don't believe in its safety, then why did you bother taking it? And will you allow this to erode other people's choices because you feel unsafe? It's one of the most selfish things that one could do, is to allow society's rights and liberties to crumble because individuals feel unsafe. It's the most individualistic thing. People are saying that this is under the guise of collectivism to protect one another, but it's really about individual fear. It's not about social good. It is not. It is about individual fear. And the collective good is to preserve rights and freedoms that have been hard won in the decades that have and hundreds of years and the centuries that have gone before us. If people want to get the vaccine, that's their choice. But to inflict it and force it on others and to remove people's choice about what they do to their own body is unacceptable. Do not comply. Do not comply. Other than that, I'm afraid I don't have anything positive to say. I'm feeling very angry about this. And thank you for my team who told me to calm down during the middle of the broadcast. But nonetheless, we will find a way. We will find a way. In history, where rights and liberties have eroded, whilst it may take a long time to fight them back, we will win them back. But we will not let them slide before we finally relent. We will keep fighting, and we will find a way. So please help us to share this episode. Go to click the share button, and please subscribe to the Pandemic Podcast. Just go to danjgregory.com/pandemic to join our mailing list. It's important that we have the ability to reach you and share content like this so that we can continue this conversation. And lastly, one of the most important things we can do right now is to educate other people about what's happening. So at the weekend, we spent 9 hours in a one-day seminar in London, where we captured 18 different speakers over 15 different sessions, really extracting all the facts that will help people to understand that what they're experiencing right now is not what it seems. And it's really important that we now start to help people understand the realities of this situation. The misinformation is out of control from this government. The fear-mongering is out of control. The behavioral science is out of control. We must start to re-educate people of the facts. So please check out the Question Everything seminar that we conducted at the weekend. It's questioneverything.io/replay. You can watch all of the sessions live right now, and they're going to be separated up and distributed in the very near future. So thank you for tuning in. I'll be back again tomorrow. But one simple message: do not comply. Peace and love for now. I'll see you tomorrow.